Good morning, everybody. Wasn't that a cheerful gospel? We're all going to be divided, right? To understand really the readings as a whole today, including what Jesus is saying in this small passage of a larger sermon, I think we need to begin with Jeremiah. Jeremiah is one of my favorite prophets of the Old Testament because in many ways, Jeremiah's story is one that is lived out in our modern world as well. Jeremiah receives the call to be a prophet by God when he's a young man, probably college age, maybe even a little bit younger than that. And his response to that call was, I don't think so. As a college student, as a teenager, beginning life, thoughts about what the future holds, right? Dreams of perhaps grandeur, of happiness and success, and his own plans as to what was going to make him happy. The thought of telling the authorities and the culture at the time that they're wrong and need to change didn't seem very appealing. Probably thinking it was a message that he wouldn't like to hear, but knowing it wouldn't be a message that anyone else is going to want to hear, and it's going to bring him a lot of grief and misery and pain. It doesn't seem like that seems very appealing at all. So initially declines. I'm too young. You need to find somebody who's more influential, more powerful. The Lord's response, if you call it the very chapter 1 of Jeremiah, is, do not say you're too young. I'll give you the words you need to speak. I'll be with you at each and every moment. And obviously there's something about this interaction and this faith and this relationship with the Lord that Jeremiah eventually responds positively to that call. And it's not an easy life, as we heard today. Right? They throw him into a cistern. Eventually he will lose his life for the prophecy. But at some point, as he grew in that relationship and grew in that vocation and grew in his understanding of that call, it experienced joy despite that. Experienced peace and a vibrant love of the Lord and faith and spirituality. He couldn't imagine backing down when given that opportunity, when trying to be forced to stop that proclamation. Perhaps life would have been a heck of a lot easier. Well, it would have been a heck of a lot easier to a certain extent, right? He would have been thrown into a cistern. He wouldn't lose his life, perhaps. But he understood at some point in that relationship that if he didn't do this, he'd be miserable. The misery he's trying to avoid as a young adult. How is he able to do that? And not just Jeremiah. Think of the last 2,000 years in our tradition, the martyrs in our tradition. Those who gave their lives willingly for the faith. Not only that, but particularly in the early church, the first half of the church, eagerly accepting martyrdom. St. Francis went out, Assisi went out to the Crusades hoping to be martyred. I'm hoping to die in my sleep at a very ripe old age, right? I don't want to be martyred. I'll be okay not being martyred, right? So what's that work? What's that all about? Why would someone willingly accept that? Well, we need to move into that second one to understand that a bit more. In the letter to the Hebrews, we hear about that great cloud of witnesses, those men and women of faith who've gone before us, the martyrs and other ones. St. Jane Chantal, whose memorial this past week, speaks of the martyrdom of love. We can't all be martyrs of blood, she said, but we can all be martyrs of love. And last week, if you recall in that first reading, we heard some of that list of this great cloud of witnesses. And if you go to the book of Hebrews, it's even bigger than what we heard last week at Mass. There's Abraham and Moses and Rahab and Gideon and David. But that list continues, doesn't it? includes Peter and John and Thomas and Paul and the apostles. And beyond that, the last 2,000 years of Francis of Assisi and Teresa of Calcutta, Maximilian Kolbe, John Paul II, Paul VI, and countless others whose names are known only to God. And what do all these witnesses have in common? Whether they're martyrs of blood or martyrs of love? Well, the author tells us they persevered in running the race. Their strength didn't come from themselves or from their resolve. It came from three things. One, a great faith. A faith that strengthened their trust in God. A faith that told them that God's promises are real. That he'll be with us on the times of great celebration and joy, but also in those times that nothing's going right. Those times when the world is against us for our faith and love in him. That not only will give us the strength, but if we allow him to, we open our minds and our hearts, he's going to give us the words and the wisdom that we need in those situations. It's the love of Christ. Love that made every sacrifice worth it. And we know that in our own human relationships, right? Which pale in terms of the love that God offers us. But think of those human relationships, that human experience of love, how energizing that is, how strengthening it is to us, how that gives us the strength to persevere, to overcome our fears, to act with courage, to stand up in ways that we didn't think possible on our own. And related to that, the faith and love brings us a third one, a focus on the goal. Our eyes fixed on Jesus, the joy of his promises and eternal life. And ultimately, that's why there's really no difference between the martyrdom of love and the martyrdom of blood. Because the focus is the same. The source of strength is the same. So one of those witnesses of the last 2,000 years, St. Ignatius of Loyola, has what's very well known as the spiritual exercises. Right? Exercises for living this faith and growing this faith in our day-to-day lives. At the very beginning of his work, where he spells out these exercises, it's really geared towards spiritual directors, he writes, "We need to know the end for which God created us, and to resolve generously to make sacrifice of everything that can divert us from that end." He could have been a business consultant in the 21st century, right? You need to know your goal. What's the goal of the business? What's your goal in life? If you don't have a goal, you're in trouble. If we don't have a goal, what are we striving for? If you don't have a dream, how boring life is. Without a dream, without a goal, mediocrity becomes a way of life. So what is this end that Ignatius speaks of? Very simply, he says, to praise, reverence, and serve God so that we may be with him forever. And that's been echoed by the church ever since then, right? Waldemar Catechism, the Catechism of the Catholic Church, basic we hear in our own catechetical lessons. Praise means not just what we do here in church, but how we live out our lives throughout the week. Our choices, our priorities, our relationships, even our work and leisure, all of it can be an offering of praise. There should be a consistency between how we act and live and think here at 9 o'clock on a Sunday morning and how we're going to be acting and living and thinking at 9 o'clock Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday. Because what we celebrate here, what we give praise to here, is meant to be a way of life. reverence, seeing others as God sees them, as made in his image and likeness, as the beloved of God, desired by God, and as such, treating them with respect and dignity, even when it's not returned to us. It involves caring for his creation and recognizing the mission he's entrusted to us. And that mission, to live and proclaim the good news, to let all the world know that they're made in the image and likeness of God, to let all the world know that they're beloved of God, and that he's the key to what they desire for the most, for the longing and peace and joy in their hearts. In service, loving God through our love of others, not just when it's convenient, and not just if it's something that makes us feel good, but a service, a care out of love. Whether it's at Christ's table as we gather here, whether it's an apostle or ministry to those on the margins of our society, outreach to the lonely and forgotten, but also in the everyday acts of love and patience and kindness and mercy that we can extend to those who are right in front of us. Some of this should sound pretty familiar, because Our Lady of Fall River Catholic Community, don't we say our mission is lived out by those three pillars of word, sacrament, and service? Very similar to what Ignatius is telling us, right? In the word, we continue our own work of conversion, of discovering who we truly are as the beloved children of God, allowing the scriptures to shape our hearts and our minds. In the sacraments, we receive the grace we need to keep running the race, especially the Eucharist, and especially reconciliation. That's why we offer them so much every day here in our parish community. And in service, we live the gospel, leading others to Christ and walking with them in faith in the day-to-day ordinary circumstances of life. We're not meant to keep this faith to ourselves. That was the message to Jeremiah. That was the message that cloud of witnesses in Hebrews speaks about. That's the message that Jesus is telling us, which makes that disruptive. Because the world doesn't want to hear that message at times. The world doesn't want to hear that they need to change, that we need to treat the person who mistreats us with love and mercy. Right? That's where that disruption is going to come in, because that message is disruptive, because it's telling the world that its thinking is wrong, that the ways of the world are not the way things should be, and that Jesus offers us a solution that's different, and that's disruptive to the individual and to the culture. St. John Chrysostom this morning in the Office of Readings is part of a homily from the Gospel of Matthew. And he writes that the Lord tells us that it was not for your own sake, but for the world's sake that the word was entrusted to you. We're given this mission not to bolster us up, to make us feel good about ourselves, to put us above other people. We're given this mission to deliver it, to deliver that message, to be his instruments, reaching out to all of the world. Like Jeremiah, like the saints, we're called to speak God's truth and share his love in our time and place. That will sometimes mean, facing resistance. But it will also mean discovering a joy that the world cannot give and that we cannot imagine. Jeremiah was very young when he received that call and very reluctant. The saints were ordinary men and women. You and I may feel inadequate to be instruments of the Lord in our world today with the challenges facing us. But the same God who knew Jeremiah before he was born knows each of us. And he has placed each of us here in this time and place for a particular reason. So let us take our place in this race. Let us run with perseverance, keeping our eyes fixed on Jesus. And when we grow weary, Let us remember the crowd of witnesses cheering us on. Jeremiah, the apostles, the saints, and all have gone before us. And may we too be faithful witnesses, so that one day we'll hear the word we long for most. Well done, good and faithful servant. Enter into the joy of your Lord.